This is the China-Hollywood Greenlight podcast, episode number 13.
And rolling sound. Quiet.
Here we go. Ready.
Speeding. 120, take 7.
And action.
This is Karen McCann, the host of the China-Hollywood Greenlight podcast, a podcast about creating and distributing content for both Hollywood and China. If you like the show, please go to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a rating so other people can find the podcast. The more we work together, the more opportunities will be out there for everyone. Today, I'm going to change my format a little. As you know, if you've heard these podcasts before, I describe my format using TV terms. So it's both procedural and episodic. It's procedural in the fact that I ask each guest the same questions so you know what to expect every week. But it's also episodic in that I tell you about my progress to getting my own projects greenlit. So I'm going to start off with the episodic part. I'll give you a quick update on my projects. I'm focusing on 3 projects, 2 action thrillers and 1 action comedy. My action comedy is being translated into Chinese, which is great since a couple of Chinese stars said they are interested and want to read it in Chinese. Number 2, I am off to the Hong Kong film market next month. And number 3, very good news. A manager introduced me to an A-list director's producing partner. So the producing partner and director are considering 2 projects of mine. So wish me luck. And now for the main segment. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to start off with a motivational quote to encourage our listeners to continue on their own path to achieving their own green light. And today's quote comes from Jim Rohn, and he said, "If you really want to do something, you'll find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse." And now here is today's interview. Today's guest is Joe Fiorello. Born and raised in New York, Joe debuted his first feature film, the low-budget horror comedy My Stuffed Animal is a Monster, mere days before relocating to Hong Kong. Since then, he's been drawing inspiration from his new home and working to make films that bridge the gap between Chinese and Western culture and filmmaking styles. Along with his first Cantonese feature film, Love Stalk, Joe has directed the award-winning microfilm Fast Love, produced the award-winning short film Boxed In, and written for the Hong Kong-produced computer-animated feature film Wings Sky Force Heroes, voiced by the ensemble cast, including Josh Duhamel and Rob Schneider. So, Joe, thank you for coming on the show today.
Cool. Thanks, Karen. Thanks for having me.
Well, I've told the audience a little bit about you, but why don't you tell us about yourself personally and more about your business?
All right, sure thing. So, so I basically am a freelance filmmaker, actor, writer here in Hong Kong. I had started off, originally I was from New York. I was living in New York City. Actually, I take that back. I was working in New York City, living in Long Island in the suburbs. I had started I'd started writing screenplays, I guess, while I was working a completely different job. I was basically, I always kind of, wanted to be a writer, was interested in the film industry. I ended up becoming an accountant. And then what happened is, went to business school, came out, accountant. There would be times that there would just be nothing to do because there would be busy seasons and there would be down seasons. Uh-huh. So I'd just be in the office with nothing to do. So I actually started writing my first screenplay while I had basically downtime. Okay. And my accountant, at this accounting firm, I was working for one of the big ones. And so that's kind of how I started along, just trying to write a screenplay for a screenplay contest at the time. So what kind of brought me to Hong Kong is because I was trying to do things over there in New York. I was basically whatever I wanted to kind of really do things very like independent style. So basically I would save up enough money and save up enough vacation time and basically pull together a crew and say, okay, let's shoot a film. And we would basically be putting together like short films until finally, we finally did that film, My Stuffed Animal is a Monster. Uh-huh. And so at the time I really kind of was set to I wanted to try someplace new. It's like, all right, I'd been in New York all my life. I wanted to gain like other experiences. All the film stuff was in Hollywood, so I was trying to talk my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, let's move to Hollywood. And she kind of thought it was a little crazy, but we kind of, she humored me, and we actually were looking into it. And what we found is that because she was still in finance, I was still kind of like an accountant, trying to be a filmmaker, and she was full out in finance. She's like, if we move to Hollywood, we're going to take huge pay cuts for what I'm going to do, and you're going to be a full-time filmmaker. You're going to not make money. We're going to have a hard time paying rent. So why don't we just stay in New York and you try to do it from here? Just filmmakers here. And I'm like, all right, fine. So I was kind of like, all right, I'll give it another go at New York. And I think about 3 days later, she comes back to me, and she's like, I know you were thinking about moving to LA, but something came up. The company I work for is offering me a position in Hong Kong.
Oh, wow.
Do you want to go? I don't know if you want to take it. And what happened was at that point, I literally turned, like I was standing next to my DVD collection, which was like right next to me. And I literally turned. It never occurred to me, Hong Kong, which was weird because I literally looked, and half of my collection was like Stephen Chow films, Jackie Chan films, Chow Yun-fat films, like John Woo films. Like literally like half of my movies that, I kind of considered my influences were Hong Kong films.
Oh,
So
wow.
immediately I'm like, yes, let's do it.
Oh, that was
like, do you want to think about it? Yeah, I'm just like, I couldn't figure out how I didn't think about that as an option. It just never occurred to me. But when we finally got here, what I quickly found out is everything I knew, or everything I thought I knew about Hong Kong film industry was like 15 years old. It was basically like what was going on during when Chow Yun-fat and John Woo and Jackie Chan were making the big movies here. And then so it was a completely different industry than I was envisioned. I was envisioned like Hollywood in Asia. I not realizing that Hollywood in Asia had kind of moved over to Beijing and Shanghai, by that time.
Well, that's you sort of answered my first question, was why did you want to enter the China market? Well, we could say Hong Kong, China, Hong Kong is part of China. It's because you got transferred there, which is funny because that's exactly my story. My husband got transferred to Hong Kong, and he was in finance.
Really?
He was in finance. So I know.
Nice.
I know exactly. I know exactly what you're going through. How long have you been in Hong Kong?
It's been 8 years now.
8 years. Oh,
No,
8 years.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay.
So, yeah, it's just wow.
So just a quick follow-up question is, what is different from what you thought Hong Kong would be? You said it was what you imagined was 15 years ago, but what was it like when you got there? You said it's...
I think when I got here, I found a couple of things very quickly. Is that there is a commercial industry here, but it's not as encapsulated in as it was let's say in LA. When you go to LA, it's like you feel and see and breathe in the film industry everywhere. It's literally kind of it's seeped into all aspects of commerce and culture in there. And so I kind of was envisioning that. Here, it's not quite like that. There's the big film companies, they make films here, but the focus had shifted, where before a lot of the films, I guess pre-handover, were made for Hong Kong audiences and I guess
Right.
the Cantonese language diaspora across the world. Now there was smaller films being made for Hong Kong audiences, and the bigger films were being made to try to get into China market or try to Chinese viewers in general across. So that was one interesting thing because, I guess, a lot of, let's say, film companies would be going over to the mainland to
Right.
shoot their films there. The other thing was that, I kind of, probably, realized that there's only so much that let's say, a Westerner with no Chinese language, no stunt experience, no martial arts, could feasibly do here. But the good thing is that I did find at the time a very vibrant independent film community. At least definitely felt like there was a lot of kind of smaller guys and girls like me that were trying to do that, do the same thing. Basically, got to Hong Kong. All of them had their different stories, but now we're trying to make Hong Kong films or videos or music videos or different kinds of content. And so as much as I was afraid that like, I was going to be kind of like, kind of going around and not knowing where to turn. I think it was very quickly where I basically like typed in, independent filmmaker Hong Kong, and I found like these networking communities that I could kind of like connect with of like other expats, either like Westerners or like let's say people from Hong Kong that went to the West, came back, or like let's say just Chinese Americans, Canadian Americans are all like now in Hong Kong and wanted to be actors, actresses, writers, filmmakers and stuff. So I connected with a bunch of people like right off the bat, and so that kind of made it a smoother transition where I found like almost collaboration partners for different projects even more quickly than when I was in New York. But one weird thing I did find is trying to get people to actually want to watch like a Hong Kong film or a Chinese film in Hong Kong was strangely a lot more difficult than it was in New York. I remember I had like my whole kind of crew that like as soon as like some kind of film would come in from Hong Kong and it would hit the theaters, like, yeah, let's go see it. Let's go to Angelica. Let's check it out. Everybody was excited. Here it was just like, yeah, there's a new Wong Jing film coming out. Let's go check it out. No, man, let's go see Avengers instead.
No.
You know? Like even my local Hong Kong friends.
The Americans will love to hear that. Well, let's say you made a film, short films. You're connecting with these locals and expats. Tell us a little bit more about what you do, like 2 or 3 main tasks. And this is, there's no such thing as a typical day, but what do you do, 2 or 3 main things you do on a typical day?
Okay, typical day, like let's say in between projects, trying to develop projects, which is where I'm at now. So I'm kind of like at the point where it's like I want to try to develop something new. Typical day is, I check to see if there's anything I can kind of like post out to get word out, to kind of just keep that interest in my social media networks kind of going. So recently I've been trying to get more of like old content that I haven't posted yet out on like my YouTube channel or like, posts out there to kind of keep my, my channels alive.
Right.
Now that they've changed like a lot of they changed a lot of policies regarding like YouTube and stuff. So, that was my bread and butter, like kind of, not something that was giving me money, but at least like someplace that was like my go-to portfolio. Here's what I've worked on. So I usually start off like try to see what I could post on social media to kind of like at least keep interest, keep people knowing like I'm still alive, I try to check to see what kind of things I could find for like research. Like, so right now I'm in the middle of a couple of stories that I'm trying to develop. So what I'll do is like, I'll check to see what I have available on hand, like DVDs I haven't watched yet, or like, let's say something on Netflix. Try to watch like a couple of things that can kind of give me like a little bit of inspiration as far as like, for whatever project I'm working on. So, like right now I'm trying to work on like a horror slasher type film and stuff. So sometimes I'll try to like, pick a couple things, watch a couple things in the morning. And then, so then at some point I'll try to sit down and try to get to writing, either like just general note taking, brainstorming, or if I'm feeling inclined, like I want to start writing some dialogue, fleshing something out, start hitting the screenwriting software. I try to make like at least like an hour, 2 hours of non-interrupted time if I can, just working on that at some point during the day. And then a lot of times just, trying to see like if there's any meetings I could take with people that like I can kind of collaborate with, or like let's say they might have a project that I could work on. Because at the same time when I'm developing projects, I'm trying to get like, either acting work or, trying to like help out other friends' projects, so basically that's about it. It'll be like kind of like social media, maybe watch a couple of things, read a couple of things, try to do some writing myself and then meet a few people to kind of, keep the network going.
Okay. Well, my next question is, and there is going to be 2 parts. Is how do you find your business partners and how do you suggest the listeners find a Chinese producer? On your film, Love Stock, was that a crowdfunded film?
It was a crowdfunded film.
So that's how you found some of the partners was through crowdfunding.
Yeah. So that's part of it. For Lovestock, it kind of like it was a long process. I think you kind of notice in the other article I mentioned, it started off as a short film
Right.
that I kind of
Amazing.
put together. So as far as like the partners, there was basically two main partners that I had throughout the production. One was Angie Palmer, who was not just the producer, but also I guess one of the actresses in the film. Basically, one of the stars of the film. Um, I had met her at basically a networking gathering. There used to be the 48-hour film festival
Right.
in Hong Kong. Haven't had it in a few years, but they had a networking gathering to kind of lead up to that 48-hour film project. I think it was 2011, something like that. And I remember, so they had it at a bar and was getting together some people. And I remember I end up um, I end up talking to Angie. Um, you know, just I think by the time she kind of me and her started talking, I actually think I was kind of tipsy. I think in remembrance, like I did kind of make a bit of an ass of myself, but that's another story. Um, but yeah, so it was something along the lines like I think I was complaining at the time about how I had heard of a number of actresses that basically had retired. Um, like at the age of like 30, they either like got
Yes.
married and
Yes.
said, I got out of, I'm getting out of the industry or this, like, or, so it was basically a bunch of like actresses I knew of. And then, so I think I kind of like was complaining about that because I think a lot of the story ideas I had in my head at the time was like I wanted to make stories about like kind of like more mature actresses,
Right.
people that really had their acting chops. And I think I was basically kind of like drunkenly complaining them, just like all the Hong Kong actresses, they either retire at 30 or they have Hong Kong Film Awards. I can't get them on my production. I can't get them on any production. So I think I was griping to her. And so she reminded me about the conversation later. I'm like, oh man, I must have been an ass. But what happened is I end up uh, meeting her there and talking about that, and then we end up getting paired together on like another project. That like what happens, but both of us had met like a film director there that was trying to do like like a music video contest. So we
Okay.
got cast in this music video contest, worked together, and like, oh wow, we really liked working together on this. And then so we're like, yeah, let's try to make something. Let's try to do something together for the next project. So there was a film project, another like film contest coming up that was held by one of the telecommunications companies, the one of the phone companies, um, 123, which I think merged with another company by now. What happened is they had a short film contest, like try to finish up this story that we started. So we basically jumped on board. We made this like short that was kind of like the sequel to like the short that they'd come up with, and it was basically written, produced by us, starring us, and then like we brought a couple other friends, and we shot this like very quickly, and so we won the grand prize. That was the one that you mentioned, Fast Love.
Right.
So we won the grand prize in this film contest, and then all these accolades. Got to meet like a number of producers and stuff, and then so again we're like, let's keep it going, make another film. So very quickly we basically wrote together a story for this short film, Lovestock, which was basically about kind of like an older woman. Well, not an older woman, like kind of like a woman in her like mid-30s having a hard time dating in Hong Kong because it's like very cutthroat, dating scene. Her kind of like younger friend is like trying to give her recommendations that's not really, not kind of really helping. But then what happened is she ends up bumping into this guy in the streets that she kind of like, finds like a personal connection with. And then she starts finding him on social media, just happening to see him pop up on all this, on social media, on dating sites. So she starts basically kind of like following after him. At the time, like Foursquare was very big, that whole check-in app of saying like, oh, I'm here at this place. So we wanted to kind of make a movie about like showcasing how, that could be like, it could be kind of like, a setting for a cutesy romantic comedy, someone like using your check-ins to kind of like get closer to you, or it could be a scary thing. Someone could stalk you for these things. So we wanted to kind of explore that theme where she's basically using his check-ins on Foursquare to follow after him and try to see if like they could capture that magic moment together, you know?
Right.
And
Now,
then
is that that was unique, but they don't offer that 48-hour film festival anymore.
no,
So how would you suggest like the listeners find perhaps a business partner or even a Chinese business partner?
oh, I mean, I think you could find them in like I think the best is to try to like outwardly look for like networking opportunities and look for also projects that you can get involved with. That
Right,
like let's
right.
say you might not necessarily it might not be a business partner kind of scenario now, but it just be a way to kind of meet people that you can possibly work with in the future. I mean, Hong Kong in general is a very small it's a very small close knit film community in that a lot of people you meet you'll find on different projects here and there, different capacities. A lot of people wear different hats. So I mean, like my other partner who in Lovestock, her name was Sophia Sheck. I had met her. She was actually the first person I met in Hong Kong. Basically, met her through a friend of mine that I had known because. This is kind of like weird out of the way. So I had gone backpacking after I graduated college. We went backpacking with a friend and went through like Spain and France. Along the way, I ended up bumping into this Australian lady who was also backpacking and following the same route. We took the same train, took the same car together and stuff, and we became friends and kept in touch. And I knew that she had worked in film in Hong Kong. So when I was coming to Hong Kong, years later, I reached out to her. I emailed her saying, "Hey, I'm going to be in Hong Kong. I wanted to see if there's anybody, like any film people that I can meet. You know, is there anybody you can recommend?" And she had recommended. She was no longer in Hong Kong. She was back in Australia, but she recommended her friend Sophia Sheck that she had worked with on a number of projects. Now, Sophia is a producer here, line producer. Does like location scouting, pretty much anything that anyone needs, like on a local Hong Kong shoot, if they're doing second unit stuff or whatever, they go to Sophia for a lot of those things, even like bigger movies from abroad. So we got connected, and so we kind of stayed off buddies, but then what happened is there was never any opportunity for us to work together at the moment. She asked me to come on set because for a project that she was doing, they needed a behind-the-scenes photographer. So what happened is, so I said, sure, I'll come and take some behind-the-scenes photo with this short film. And that short film, there was a number of actors, actresses, crew people, assistant crew that basically I ended up meeting. From me just taking pictures behind the scenes, I was meeting a lot of people, a lot of people that would be working on other projects. And sure enough, I've kind of crossed paths with them across, my 8 years in Hong Kong. Interestingly enough, I have a story about a friend of mine who actually ended up meeting his partners. He ended up making a real leap into it. He was a photographer. He does like fashion photography. He was just starting to get into doing videography. He had basically got asked to do behind the scenes video on an independent feature film that was shooting in Hong Kong. Basically, a guy from San Francisco wanted to shoot a movie in Hong Kong and hired a local Hong Kong crew. What happened is, as they were shooting, my friend was commenting on how the guy who was actually shooting the film, the actual DP, was not very good. Wasn't able to, didn't have the right equipment, didn't really, couldn't get right angles, and was not very good. And what happened is, I guess word got to the director that he was saying these things. So the director was like, oh, well, let me see what you could do then. And then he basically lit and shot a scene, and he's like, this is beautiful. He fired the other DP, and he hired my friend to take over as director of photography on set. Now that's something...
That's a little unusual.
Yeah,
a little unusual. Might not be able to count on that.
Yeah, you can't count on that, but it's something where when you get into smaller independent films, you get small enough where, you never know what can happen on set,
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about a past project where you had a problem. How did you overcome it, and what did you learn?
So yeah, I mean, the biggest problem with Lovestock was the money.
Okay.
Trying to get financing. So I know you wanted to hear about the crowdfunding. So yeah,
Well,
that right there.
any problem, but yeah, financing is always a problem for everybody. So
Yeah, finance for everyone. But yeah, for Lovestock especially, we had kind of taken the project around, trying to see if we can get like local producers on board, try to get like finance in traditional ways, and we kind of faced a lot of shut doors because the story is not the typical story that, like, let's say, a lot of producers would necessarily kind of jump on board. There was a number of producers that basically told us the same thing. They're like, you have a story about kind of like an actress in her late 30s, about a character in her late 30s, and there's no action in the front, no action in the middle. There's action at the end, but then it's just at the end. And I'm like, well, I'm making a kind of like romantic thriller, I'm not making an action movie. He's like, all right, well, he's like, if you bring me this same story, but put action in the front, action in the middle, action at the end, but then make it starring 20-something-year-old characters.
Change everything.
Yeah, it was literally like that thing, and I'm like, so the same exact story, but it's a completely different story, So we kind of like really wanted to make the story we wanted to do. So we decided we had to go on our own. With the crowdfunding, what we quickly found out is crowdfunding in itself is a project in itself.
Oh yeah.
You basically have to put like the same level of preparation, the same level of time per day that you would probably do in shooting a movie into actually doing the crowdfunding campaign.
Yeah.
And that was then when I felt like it was just getting started, and I think it was easier. I think now you really have to approach crowdfunding from a standpoint. I feel that like you have to go in with like this real strategy and production value to the crowdfunding campaign. I've seen a lot of people that have failed because I think there's this assumption that like if I put it out there, people will come, and they pay attention the first couple days, and the end days. It's like we were basically emailing people every day. We kind of set like, all right, every day we need to email 5-10 people saying, hey, please check out our campaign. We had anyone that got a response, we had to send a reminder before the end of the campaign. Otherwise, they forget. First 3 days, we like, oh sure, I'll definitely contribute. And then 3 months later, it's like, oh yeah, so where's the crowdfunding campaign? So we had to
which platform did you use?
We used Indiegogo.
Indiegogo.
Yeah, at the time we decided to go with that because I think we were going to go full force, we were full speed ahead with the film regardless. And I think Indiegogo was a platform that like had that option of like whatever money you raised, you can go with. But they, you still got a penalty if you didn't make that funding target. So, there was that thing where we also were ready to kind of like drop in our own money if we had to kind of put in a little extra just to get across that mark. We were, and at the time we were raising $50,000 US, which was much higher than any other Hong Kong-based crowdfunding that we had seen. I think since then there's been a few other ones, documentaries mostly that basically like raised like 90,000, 100,000, 200,000. But I think for us it was kind of groundbreaking, 50,000 at the time.
So you had to learn crowdfunding strategies quickly.
Very quickly, yeah. So I mean, I think Angie, my producer, had some experience of it when she was in the U.S. She had been in the U.S. for a couple of years, and I think she had kind of been like behind the scenes on somebody else's crowdfunding campaign.
Okay.
But this was her first time kind of really heading one up, and then first time for me too. So. So I was just glad we made that mark,
So besides the obstacle of crowdfunding, what are well, let me put it like this: if you could magically solve two current problems, what would they be?
Two current problems, I guess, with the industry in general here.
For just that you would like to solve yourself for yourself.
Oh,
and you could mention for the industry too, but first let's talk about two things for yourself.
Okay. I mean, I really would, I'd love it if there was more opportunities to get like some of these smaller films, like more like kind of like streams to get out, like let's say these films that they could reach out the audience. I think, like platforms like YouTube, I think were at the time, at the beginning were a place where you could stick in a movie and I think it could find its audience, if it, at its worst case scenario. But I think there's not a lot of, I think, I think we've had a hard time, like, let's say, breaking into like that mainstream distribution.
Right.
So we had to kind of go with like more, smaller distribution channels. And, I wish there was more of them in more areas, because in Hong Kong, there's a couple. We've got it on like Google Play and stuff like that. But I do wish there was something where, more channels and more interest, frankly, in like independent homegrown films. I think one of the issues that you also find, I guess this is a second issue, is that people aren't as interested in homegrown independent films in Hong Kong unless they've won accolades abroad. Unless, like, basically abroad, they've people have kind of stamped their approval saying this is a good movie, and then it kind of gets re-imported. It's the weirdest thing, you would think, because like I think that's where I think like in New York there would probably be scenes of people that are like kind of reach out for like ultra low budget films and like indie films, and there's kind of conventions where people kind of like have tables, booths set up, like kind of promoting their films. There's not a lot of opportunities like that here. It's literally like you just set up a screen yourself and do your best, or you get one of the distributors that will put it in theaters, but they want to see a star. They want to see a star in the film before they'll consider it, or they want to see big accolades. I mean, like the famous example is like I think even Andy Lau, when he did like this independent film about like the story was about him and like
His Alma?
and his Alma. Nobody wanted to screen it in Hong Kong until it won like Berlin or Venice or something like that. Then everyone's like, oh, wow, Andy Lau film won these accolades abroad? Okay, sure. Then it got a wide screening. But from what I heard, like all the distributors like, who's going to want to watch Andy Lau in a film like this? I want to see him in an action movie. It wasn't until he won awards in Europe and the US that like then they're like, okay, we'll screen the film. And it became a big success. So, I mean, that's for an Andy Lau film.
Right.
So for like smaller independent.
Would that be different if it was like an action movie?
I think it's possible, but again, I think with action, it's tough. I mean, in general, it's tough to get like action without some sort of budget.
That's true. Yes. Okay.
And yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the one is streams these independent films, and the second one would be the audience, accepting the local homegrown films.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's hard to do independent work and get it like kind of, screened and played here without a star or without a budget,
right.
or with without something kind of drawing in the audience. And there's not as much of an there's not as much like kind of like that passion for like, oh, I want to check out something that's underground. I feel there was more of that in the U.S. than here.
So that leads to my next question. Is that going to be your next future project? What kind of future projects are you hoping to make? What, the same kind of romantic thriller, or the same kind of budgets, and the follow-up question to that is, what do you think the Chinese studios or Hong Kong studios are looking to do?
I mean, for me personally, I think for next project, I would probably lean towards I'd like to kind of do something more genre oriented. Right. I'd like to do something. I know the last movie was Cantonese language. I think I would like to do something more English language to try to get more acceptance and channels abroad. But I would like to see if it's possible. If I would like to get a project where we could bring in, like, let's say, a couple of stars or former stars, kind of like that, faces that like people would recognize, that, maybe doing a story that they might not otherwise do. So there's a couple of projects I've had in mind. One, I'm helping work with a friend of mine that's kind of like more like kind of like a traditional slasher film. Kind of like very like kind of more genre horror film type. But there is another project that I've been kind of working on that is a little bit more kind of like thriller. Kind of like thriller kind of action, like, but still kind of almost like almost like one of those like action thriller kind of like revenge type movies,
Right.
that like basically that pretty much do well in any kind of market. So I am kind of leaning more towards like doing something that, as opposed to like, let's say, trying to buck the trend, but still kind of being creative within that,
Right.
trying to find what the market wants more. So yeah, I think that's what you kind of have to do. I think
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to tell your own story.
Well, I think you do have to, be attentive to the market, and the market really likes genre films. Tell a special story in a unique way, your own story
Yeah.
in a unique way, but through a genre, a popular genre would probably make it more distributable.
Yeah.
So, what do you think the Hong Kong or the Chinese studios are looking for?
I mean, the Chinese studios, I think the biggest thing that they want to do is, I think there's two things that they want to accomplish. One, they want to be able to show that Chinese movies can work abroad, that can be accepted abroad, and that Chinese stories can be kind of like go out. I think, and there's two reasons. I mean, one is just like everybody wants their stories to be told, but I think also the Chinese studios in mainland, they're very much oriented and connected with the government, with the government plan that like essentially they wanted to use as a soft power,
Right.
kind of, a source of soft power, which, in reality, it's been for the U.S. for the longest time. It's just not been like a government sponsored thing. It's just happened that like everybody loved American movies for like the longest time, and then so that kind of gave almost like an indirect soft power to the U.S. I think China sees that and wants to do it the reverse,
Right.
and that's why you see the attempt to try to like do co-productions where you bring in American like big budget stories to at least take place apart in China, but also now you're seeing more effort to try to like get Chinese stories that like will take you see effort in both ways, where it's just like, okay, we want to get a couple of Chinese actors in this big story so they can kind of be included in the story, but also trying to do bigger Chinese stories, but include Western actors to try to appeal to the West. So I think they're trying, so I think there's probably going to be more efforts to do that on a bigger scale. I think they're what they attempted with, like, let's say, the Great Wall was probably a stumbling block in that strategy, but I could foresee them trying more and more to try to do that kind of stuff, take Chinese stories and figure out ways to take it abroad. But the other thing is production values. I think all the Chinese studios are trying to really show that they're able to do stuff as slickly produced and as like big and like as ambitious as, like, let's say, the U.S. Production companies can. And I think it's something where you're seeing a lot of great efforts that for a while you would see a lot of movies come out that's just like, oh well, the CGI and that's not great. But I think that happens. I think when we look at the movies that were coming out of the West, when CGI technology was just starting to be really implemented on a large scale, if you look back at some of those movies now, like that were in the early 90s and stuff, the special effects look terrible in it compared to today's standards. So I think a lot of it is just really trying to develop the technology through trial and error. So those are the big studios. I think Hong Kong studios, there's still kind of this appeal to go towards China, not just for theatrical, but now I see a lot of Hong Kong-based studios and production companies trying to get on digital, because now digital is getting huge on these digital platforms that are based in China. There's a lot of people putting together these basically these just digital only movies, just specifically going straight to digital, straight to online movies in Hong Kong and doing well for themselves. So I see a lot of effort on that from Hong Kong production companies because I think we're getting to a point that in order to really do in order to kind of do theatrical nowadays in a lot of people's minds, you either have to have like big budget, or you have to have like something that really hits on like really touches on the nerve of like those local second and third tier city audiences. I think like if you look at like this last year, there was 2 or 3 movies that were basically kind of smaller scale comedies that really ignited the box office across mainland China, and that's because they really spoke to those like now burgeoning second and third tier cities that now get bigger, get more affluent, get more cinemas, and they have a particular sense of humor, so they're not going to really find as much interest in even some of the bigger, more broad Chinese movies. They want to see something that'll make them laugh, like from like a very colloquial standpoint. So I think you're going to see more attempts at doing that, trying to hit like, let's say those particular spots of like the, kind of like the growing underbelly of the population, or I don't know what's the right term for it, but
right.
Yeah, basically those smaller cities that like, let's say are now grown into tens of millions,
Well, I did some reading about how the second and third and fourth tier cities in China is where the growth is, and it's being led by women and couples. So the fact that your feature film, the star was a woman, I think you're on the right track there, and I have the same idea, I think if you appeal to a female audience, especially the second or third tier cities have proven, that's where the growth is. So if you're not a VFX person, and can't really contribute to the production values, and if you're not doing $100 million film, trying to help China with the movies go abroad, maybe the other opportunity for the audience is, consider a digital movie, especially consider these second or third tier cities where it's the women who, from what I've read, are growing that market.
Yeah, true. And I think that's kind of the direction that we were kind of stumbling towards when trying to do Lovestock. I think in retrospect, because I do feel like when we were trying to do the project, I guess we were kind of, for lack of a better term, scared of trying to appeal to China, because we figured it would be like a lot of like red tape and stumble blocks. So we kind of like steered clear of that. What we actually tried to do was tried to make the movie have like Singaporean elements. So we could still kind of have that like kind of cross-border international thing. Especially since our Angie was the producer and the actress, she was actually Singaporean. So we put all these Singaporean elements to try to appeal to that, and we figure like, hey, we're going to be, for sure, people are going to want to watch this in Singapore and Malaysia. People like Cantonese movies there. People, haven't gotten distribution in Singapore and Malaysia. Like the one place that we're like, oh, we're absolutely sure we're going to be able to get our movie in.
Well, yeah, well,
Singapore turned us down. Malaysia basically said our movie was too racy. And I'm like, where? We got a kissing scene at the beginning.
it's never a dull moment. Now, my next question is kind of a trick question. What question did I not ask you that I should have?
I see. One question I think that I get asked by a friend of mine that I go to for advice every now and then, and it's something that just like, especially when like, let's say I'm developing a story and I'm like, what do you think about this awesome story? I got this great plot. I got this awesome high, and she'll basically ask me this one simple question that usually kind of makes me go, oh, maybe I need to change my whole thinking. What is the story that you as a filmmaker really want to tell? Like, deep down inside, what is the real story, the theme that you're trying to bring out in your work? And what's funny is like I could never really, whenever she would bring it up, I'm like, all right, well, now that you mention, I don't know. But when I was looking at your question, you're saying, "Oh, you're gonna ask this question." I'm like, I thought about this. I have an answer. So for me, I think when I look at like all the stories I try to tell, the thing that kind of comes out on the page is that everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from or what they're doing or what everyone, and this is cheesy, but I think this is what comes out of me. I'm cheesy. What can I say? Everyone's looking for love. Whether and so I think like that's probably like the story that I think kind of always seems to come out like in my work. So whether you're an assassin, whether you're a psychotic killer, whether you're like basically a person out for revenge, whether you're like a high powered executive and stuff like that. So it's just like going through all the movies that I've kind of like worked on and stuff. I think everyone deep down inside is looking for love and like kind of and that's kind of like the I guess the theme that always kind of comes through in the work that I've done before. But again, it's cheesy. So I don't know if that's...
No, it's not cheesy. It's universal. It's universal. So what is the story that you want to tell? Yes, that's a good question. Now, my last question is, what advice can you give those aspiring to tap into the Chinese market?
Learn Chinese.
Learn Chinese. And by that, do you mean Mandarin?
I would say for Mandarin, I think if you're going to go for the China market, for like mainland China market, I think Mandarin definitely to find the time and find the how do you say really kind of push yourself to try to learn. Right. But if you're coming to Hong Kong and you want to do real kind of Hong Kong films, Mandarin will be helpful. Cantonese will get you more connected with the local film industry, as far like the local filmmakers and stuff like that. So, I think, but I think that's definitely one piece of advice. I think looking back, I should have put a lot more effort and time into kind of like learning that. I think that would have helped me along. But also the other thing is that I think, if you're going to come to China or you're going to come to Hong Kong, I think, I think this was touched upon on like one of your other podcasts, is like the idea is, if you're going to come here and think, I'm going to change everything about how things are done in Hong Kong or in China and industry. I'm going to show them, I'm going to make everything like Hollywood. I think you could be in for disappointment. You could try, but you could spin your wheels for a couple of years, and then and eventually you're going to realize, no, I got to figure out how people do their film, how people do things here, because I think I think there's a lot of people that do come with that mentality. I came in with that kind of mentality to some extent, like I'm going to show everybody my brilliance. And I'm gonna show them how to make movies unlike they've ever seen before.
Right. Yeah, I think that's more power to you.
Yeah, I think yeah. Just you have to, if you're gonna come here, be warned that that's probably not the right mentality. That's gonna you're not gonna find too much success in the mentality, unless you have a lot of money to throw. Right.
Well, you have to have your own vision, but you do have to work within the system. So sort of have to do both. Now, how can the audience keep track of you? Do you want to share some social media details or some website links?
Oh yeah, I'd love to. So my personal YouTube channel, where I put a lot of my work, is youtube.com/Joe Fiorello Films, and then also have a Instagram, which is basically Instagram. I post up a lot of stuff there, which is Instagram.com/Joe Fiorello HK. Oh wait, is it Joe Fiorello HK or Joe Fiorello _HK?
Well, you can send it to me. I'll put it in the show notes.
And then also for Lovestock, it just Joe Fiorello _HK, and then also for lovestockmovie.com, and we have a little website there for that.
Great. Well, Joe, thank you for coming on the show today. This has been really fun, and I know the audience got a lot out of this. I sure did, and so thank you again for being on the show.
Cool. Thanks, Karen. Thanks so much for having me. I hope I didn't talk your ear off.
I love it. I love it. Great. Well, we'll see you at the premiere.
Great.
I've got 3 key points. Number 1, Joe brought up how it was easier for Chinese indie films to attract an audience in New York than in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, it was more the mainstream films that attracted an audience. Number 2, Joe shopped his feature film script in Hong Kong, but producers wanted to change everything, so he took matters into his own hands and crowdfunded it. If you try to crowdfund, you need to find your audience first. If you build it, they will come does not apply to crowdfunding. And number 3, Joe mentioned that independent Hong Kong films, those obviously those without stars, really only get into theaters if they have won accolades abroad. So what do you do if you don't have accolades abroad or perhaps recognizable faces in your independent film? Well, one idea is to pay a star for a day to have a cameo in your film, or B, try and go the high concept route, which is to have some kind of having a surprise twist in the story. It makes you very unique. It starts a buzz and it finds an audience. Now, neither of those are by any way, shape, or form an easy task, but it could be what gets your film into the theaters. And for takeaways, I have 4. Number 1, Joe started out saying when he got to Hong Kong, the film industry he imagined was around 15 years ago. He mentioned that Hollywood in Asia was now in Beijing and Shanghai, not so much Hong Kong anymore. If you're planning on getting into the Chinese film space, now it seems the growth, the action is in Beijing and Shanghai. Number 2, Joe mentioned he met his future partners for his feature film at a film festival that no longer exists in Hong Kong. And I say, why not create a mini festival online? But if you can't find or don't want a distribution deal, then that leaves only self-distribution. Or maybe a small film is your calling card and you land some gigs on other projects that way. Either way, Joe got out there and made a film and has credits to his name. Festivals are great for showcasing talent and networking, but if there's none near you, you either travel further or DIY, do-it-yourself marketing and distribution. Number 3, regarding future projects, Joe talked about his challenge with his romantic thriller. Now his next project will be a genre project, and he'll attach recognizable faces. He says genre films tend to do better in any market, so keep that in mind. And as he said, and has been written a lot about in the press, Chinese studios want to show that Chinese stories can go abroad. And as Joe said, and you've all read, China wants to expand its soft power. The Chinese are also ramping up their production values. And if you heard my last podcast with Brendan Davis of Bong Bong Pictures, there is a huge opportunity for VFX. And the last one, digital platforms are exploding, as Joe said. So consider a digital-only movie. That may be an easier avenue to get your film out there. Also, the growth in China really is in the second and third tier cities. They're building more cinemas and becoming more affluent. And lastly, a resource, I'll put a link in the show notes. I wrote 2 blogs. One is called Crowdfunding in China, and this gives you links to Chinese crowdfunding platforms. And the second blog I'll put a link to is called Target Your Audience with a Chinese Avatar. And here I talk about the growth of second, third, and fourth tier cities in China and how you can tailor your content to reach a bigger audience. So that's the show for this week. Thank you for listening. To show your support, please go to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a rating so other people can find the podcast. And I'll see you at the premiere. Bye. 一会儿见.